Thank you, Julia. I just want to, I want us to get comfortable with the idea of non-closure, right? For those of you who never had these conversations, it would be great, right? If we could have this one magical conversation and now our problematic family member or friend is no longer problematic, right? That would be amazing. But unfortunately, it's just not the way these things work. They tend to be conversations that can span possibly years, right? Like ongoing conversations about these things. You think the person, is listening with you and understanding what you're saying, and and then they end up saying something like, "Wait a minute, we've talked about this." So just getting comfortable with understanding that this is something that's going to take time. This is not a one conversation type of thing. The other thing that I want to talk about briefly is that I want to invite you all to turn on cameras, as Julia said, because we want to foster community as much as possible, even though we are on Zoom. So just wanted to reiterate that. The other thing is, please feel free to put thoughts, questions, reflections, things that pop up. Just go ahead and pop that in the chat. Others may, want to piggyback on what you're saying, but as we're going through the event, please feel free to do that. Groups that have been historically oppressed can freely engage on issues of specific resonance without having the added burden of educating those for whom those issues may be new. These spaces are not segregation or the only space for racial equity work, social clubs or cliques, a place to be silent, or a place to complain about other members of other racial groups. So I just want us to be mindful of that. We will be having 3 different racial affinity spaces, and you all will self-select. They will be a Black space, a non-Black POC space, and a white space. So I would like us to start with the white group to share out what they would like to share with the whole group.
So we didn't actually prepare any report back. We got very just chatting, but I did take some sort of notes to try to get themes and things, but I'd be curious if somebody else wants to share something that they noticed, we talked about, or that stuck with them. If that's appropriate, Michelle, I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's totally fine, Harriet.
Group want to go? I can share a couple things, that I don't want to step on anybody if they'd like to share in this relatively small larger group. One thing that stuck out to me that's in my notes is sort of like patterns of behavior that we learn when we're talking about families of origin, patterns of behavior and how that influences how we engage with each other generally. Mm-hmm. Never mind talking about racism and anti-Blackness and sort of the additional like that sort of like preliminary hurdle of engaging with family and what that means and what it looks like and how we show up. Mm-hmm. And how we are perceived as individuals, and then moving on to the hard conversations and how all of that plays together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tammy.
But I think to piggyback on that, the way that whiteness and white culture in some of the white families that we're in sort of can influence us to be non-confrontational, and sort of like valuing peace over surface level peace rather than kind of actually deepening relationships by talking about the things that are really important.
Thank you, Kate. Anyone else from the white space want to share, reflect?
We also mentioned difficulty of maintaining emotion if you really want to call somebody out, but that's not going to be the way to do it. But on the other hand, are we doing too much tone policing of ourselves? Yeah, so that whole tension with that.
Thank you, Lenny. Anyone else want to share?
Maybe I can close out by saying that we all named some strengths that we had that like we can try to remember, like just the courage to do it and the patience to know that it is not a one conversation deal, that nothing is. Being able to like listen to where other folks are and how to kind of like insert different challenges and ask clarifying questions, and just sort of, yeah, a general openness to trying and knowing that it's a long-term co-learning project.
Mhm. Thank you, Harriet. As I was listening to you all talk about, you know, how white people kind of show up in their families and kind of like, I guess maybe almost like a white family culture, I was thinking about, you know, how we talk about when we're doing workshops about like white silence, right? So I was just kind of thinking about how those things are similar, right? That if the family structure is already, you know, we're socialized, you know, if you're socializing a white family that way anyways around any topic, then, you know, it makes it that much harder to break that silence because, you know, it's not socially acceptable as Americans, period, right? To talk about race, let alone if you're within a white family. So that's just something that I was thinking about. Any other comments or reflections from the white group? All right. Julia and Ani, did you have anything you wanted to share out?
Not particularly.
Okay.
Like during our discussion, we didn't have, it was just us. So no, not really.
Okay. Anthony, did you want to share anything from our reflections?
Yeah, so Michelle and I talked about family, and we talked a little bit about our like journey in having conversations with family, and both of us sharing and kind of being the person who brings up when someone's saying that something that was anti-Blackness or like rooted in anti-Blackness or whatever. And I'll share reflections of what I'm going to be thinking about after this convo too, which is I've realized and gotten better at when I need to be like, okay, we don't need to have the conversation right now. At some point, maybe we can revisit it. I had given the example that my aunt and I were just catching up and talking, and then this was right after protests after George Floyd's murder. And it just seemed to be going well, like, and just talking about what was happening in current news. And then she had talked about the protests, but not destroying stuff. And so then I had given something that was counter of what she was saying. And then we kept going. And I know that in the past, I would have been like, wait, no, I don't think you get it. And I would have kept going. But I was like, oh, I'll just plant something there. And like, that is fine. And then I can exit because this is not how the conversation was set up. I didn't enter it to be like this.
Yeah.
And so I've noticed more of that in my conversations with family members, especially since there's it's family. Like you do have that you'll get to see them again. There's a different way that you can engage with them or enter into the conversation. And so it's like if there's something that I feel like is on the table that needs to be discussed, then I've recognized better ways to come back to revisit it and not be like, I have to do it then and there. Because I gave the example, I said, Michelle, I used to be like the person that's the Christian in the family trying to save everybody. And if everybody doesn't get saved, I can't go to heaven. Like I used to be like that when I first started having these conversations, and then realized and we talked about self-care too, how self-care goes into that, and knowing when you need to like preserve some of your energy. So
Yeah.
Can I just add something really quickly? Even though it's just Ani and I in the group, but I do want to add, like, that is definitely one of the things that I've learned as well, is that not every conversation needs to be had in certain spaces. If you're at a dinner table and you know that it's a bunch of people there, and maybe this is like a thing that you can do one-on-one, or it's another time you can have that conversation. It's also things that I've learned. And I also have learned, like, I mean, this is very difficult, but I think that, like, because I was the one that would kind of like push back and start the conversation, I would come in like really, really aggressive. I would be like, well, this, that, and the other. And like, you know, because I have the stats, like I would be able to pull up stuff ASAP. And so I had to remember, like, learning this information, while it is urgent and paramount for people to truly understand it, I actually had the opportunity to be eased into my own understanding, and I'm still learning. And so, like, the process of learning that the world is not the way that you thought it was, and that maybe you're not the smartest as you thought. It's like, and maybe you worked hard, but maybe there was something that was pushing you along. That is really difficult and jarring to accept on a personal level, as a cultural level, in your family. And so I think being able to recognize that people also are having that experience as they're being confronted is important. So what I've started doing is using the question method, where it's like, okay, well, like, can you tell me like more about how that would look? Or like, oh, okay, well, like, why do you think that? And so I think it can help me, it's helped me at least, I think, get a little bit more into their insight, gauge where they are in their own kind of understanding. Because there's some people you can recognize like, oh, they're just trying to argue, and I'm not going to do that. Like, and you have to recognize it, who just like, well, I think this, and it's like, you're not being serious. Like, you're unserious, and therefore I can't be serious with you. But if it's someone who was like, well, I don't think that. I mean, like, and you can hear it where they're kind of like struggling, where it's like, this doesn't make sense. Okay, well, let's break that down. And so asking questions for me has been a way to do that. So I guess that's my reflection.
Thank you, Julia. Yes, I love that technique of asking more questions. So thank you for bringing that up. Another thing that came up for me when Anthony and I were talking is that it wasn't until preparing for this event, in the video that we showed, I was thinking about how I have for a long time just taken on this role as a family member who kind of always gets on her anti-Blackness soapbox. And that is just like, oh, here goes Michelle again, right? And like, how effective is that? I'm kind of thinking about that, and Anthony and I were talking, and I was like, you know what? I think I should talk to my family and ask them how effective they think that my methods have even been, right? Because I've never really thought about it, right? Because it's like, well, I'm telling them the right thing, so that's all that matters, right? So yeah, just like, I think for me, like, having been that person who's like always Afrocentric and majored in African American history and just like took that role on in the family, I do want to like kind of think about that more and take a step back and think about, how I want to approach these conversations going forward.
There is I'm recognizing now, so there's a chart that like we used to do in the PLC series about getting ready for having these conversations with, and it could be with family, coworker, or whatever. But in what I hear, and what I think is a very important part of it is ego. There is like, your ego could really put you in a place that does not lend itself to a fruitful or healthy conversation. And it takes some time. And like we talk about before having the conversation, what do you need to center yourself? But I'm thinking about how much you need to be able to check your ego before jumping into these conversations. Yeah.
Thank you, Anthony.
Yes, ego is huge. And as a humanities person, I was like here goes Julia, like, and I was, I'm like super sarcastic, and so that can come off as, to me, it's funny, but for some people it can be condescending, and that was hard for me. I was like, but I'm not being condescending. They're like, but you kind of are, because I'm like, get on my level. I need you to understand that like we're in trouble as a country, and they're like, okay. I think that definitely ego is important, and just remembering that, like I said, like I have my sister. She's in her own like learning about like patriarchy, and I'm so proud of her. But like it took her a while, and so like when she's getting it now, she's like, you've been saying this, but now I get it. But it's hard. Like it's hard to recognize that. So cutting down on condescension can be helpful.
Yeah. Thank you, Julia. Anyone else have any reflections or thoughts before we wrap up? Okay, I want to thank you all for coming to this.
Can I say?
Oh yeah. Go ahead,
I just wanted to say I just finished Loretta Ross's course on calling in, And it was like over 4 weeks, and it's a webinar twice a week. It's twice a week, so it's like a webinar on Tuesdays, and then Thursdays they have a lab where we practice. And she's just terrific. I mean, she's just done so much work over the years. I really highly recommend her course and her work.
Thank you, Lenny. Anyone else have any last thoughts, things they want to share? All right. Well, I want to thank you all for spending your Sunday morning with us. And there's lots of places you could have been, lots of things you could be doing, especially, you know, sleeping in on a fall morning. But I really thank you for showing up, for coming to the space with your full selves and participating in the breakout spaces and in the full space, the large group. So yeah, just thank you so much for being here. And if we could close with our donation page real quick, Dana, or our social media page. Just want to remind everyone to please connect with us on social media if you haven't already. Once again, we're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. So if you have friends and family who you want to share this actual discussion with, they won't get like the breakout spaces or anything like that. But if you want to share the rest of this with a friend or a family during the holidays, it will be up on YouTube soon. So you can find it there to share. Looks like Dana's popping things in the chat as well. Once again, we are a nonprofit. We do appreciate any donations that you would like to give us so we can continue this work. Yeah, and I think that is about it. Anybody else have any?
Oh, just remember to come for our December 13th event.
Oh yes, December. Julia, did you want to plug that real quick? I don't want to put you on the spot.
As she puts you on the spot.
Okay. We will be here again on December 13th. And
yes,
we hope to see you all there.
Yes, we're going to be talking about called Black in Business, the state of like entrepreneurship. And so we're hoping to talk about, you know, Black folks who own businesses and the kind of ups and downs and pitfalls that they go through, like how racism and those things are interconnected. Well, hopefully, you know, having some places you can support and learn from. So that is the goal.
Thank you, Julia.
I also want to plug too in that because it's on Black businesses, not just for like potential places for all of us can buy for and for white people to buy for, but also in that conversation, white people recognizing what type of privilege or power they have to do some leverage in there. Because oftentimes when we have titles that are like Black, sometimes folks are like, well, I'm not Black, so this isn't an event for me. So also encouraging for like all folks to attend that there is going to be some action steps for everyone to be able to participate in. So
thank you for that, Anthony. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us. We hope to see you again in December. Have a good day, everyone.